Is done?
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Facebook is not yet on.
Yeah, it's being connected right now, but we can start the session.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Majha House. Our session this evening takes a look at the northeast of India and at the communities of women from these states. And we've got four women here with us today who are going to tell us stories about the northeast and bring that region into the very heart of Punjab, where Majha House is situated in Amritsar. The hills of the Northeast are beautiful, and it never ceases to amaze me how green and rain soaked they are. Growing up in Madhya Pradesh, as I did in the very heartland of this country, I never saw anything like that. And traveling through those lush forests and the, full of hanging creepers and all this intense kind of greenery all around, it always seemed to me that this was some kind of wonderland that I had arrived in. And right from that first trip that I made to Nagaland some 25 or more years back, all these, the wondrous sights I saw there, the kind of people that I met, the women, the men that I interacted with over there, um, it seemed to me that it was all at once magical. It was a quiet place that you had wandered into. Not many people knew about it. And yet there were so many things simmering under the surface. And a lot of them I did come to understand a little bit of later on subsequent trips there. Meeting people across the states of the Northeast has always been a rewarding experience for me. And the stories that I heard in those more than 25 years of travel and work exposed me to a world that I think is little known even now in the rest of the country. And then this is also, I think, despite the fact that the government and various concerned communities of citizens are making an effort to bridge these cultural and other gaps and distances. And as a result, we see so many more people from there, young people especially, coming out to the so-called mainland for education, for work, things like that. So this, of course, means that there is a lot more visibility, there's a lot more interaction, but even so, a lot of the stories remain hidden. A lot of what happens there remains hidden. Um, the seemingly quiet hills and plains of the Northeast have seen a lot of bloodshed. They've seen violence. They've seen simmering discontent for decades. And I hope today that, today we're not going to be talking about all of that, but definitely we will talk about uh, strong women's movements, strong collectives formed by women who have worked in these areas, both social and political, and we want to listen to stories about them. I also thought that this would be important to do in Punjab and through Majha House because I have not seen a similar thing here. And I just thought that it's time we heard these women, heard the stories that come to us from the Northeast, and maybe we will learn from there. I hope that sometime later we will do a similar kind of session about Punjab and the women here, uh, and and uh, and see the kind of contrasting trajectories that present themselves. Um, when we or rather thought about doing this with Mitra and the others on this panel, the idea was that we would try and talk about all the states. We did want to bring in women from the other states as well, but as you'll see, there are more Assamese, and there's of course Kongpat from Meghalaya. Unfortunately, we did not manage to get somebody from Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur, etc. But that does not mean we will not be traveling there today and listening to stories from there, because I think each one of these women has enough experience and enough of work and research that they have done, which we will talk about today. I also want to say that this is not the first conversation that we are going to have on the women of the Northeast. It is a beginning, and I am hoping that we will be able to put the Northeast women center stage again and again, and that we will then get in further stories and further things from other communities as well. So let me quickly introduce you to the speakers that we have here today. We have Patricia Mukhim, Padmashree. She's editor of the Shillong Times, highly respected English newspaper in the Northeast. She's an activist, writer, and an expert on a lot of issues to do with gender. And she has a number of awards and honors to her credit. She's one of the finest editors and journalists that I know. She is outspoken, fearless, and she's also often faced a lot of trouble, including some amount of, I think, violence, no? I remember still that bomb thing that had happened some years back. We have also with us Mitra Phukan, best-selling author and translator. She's written novels and short stories and translated the work of some of Assam's outstanding leading writers into English. She also writes a fortnightly column for the Assam Tribune, and she also reviews Indian music. She is herself a trained Hindustani classicals vocalist, and she is also founder member of the Northeast Writers Forum, which links together writers who write in English across the region. And her novel, The Collector's Wife, is soon to be made into a film, I think. Yeah, Mitra?
Yes, it's been optioned,
forward, yeah.
but we don't know when.
Yeah. RAKHEE Kalita Moral has been teaching for over 2.5 decades, and she's currently head Center for Women's Studies and Associate Professor English at Cotton University in Guwahati. She's published widely on conflict, on women, and she works on the intersections of gender and peace and literary studies. All exciting, all very, very interesting stuff. Her publications include Once Upon the Hills, Everyday Practices of Naga Women, Voices and Concerns, Gender and Society in the Northeast, and her new book is looking at women combatants in Assam. She'll be talking about all of these, I hope, today to us. Teresa Rehman is an award-winning journalist and now the editor of an e-magazine that she started called The Thumbprint, with its strong gender lens, and it's trained on all issues to do with the Northeast region. She is the author of The Mothers of Manipur, a book that is sitting right here on my desk today. And we'll definitely ask her about the strong women of Manipur, the Mira Paibis. We were also to have another young woman with us today, Tora Agarwala, but unfortunately she's been called away on work and she's not able to join us. We are missing her because she was supposed to bring us some very special stories that she's been working on in different states. But yeah, I hope the others will make up for that loss. So what I thought we would do is to ask each of you to speak to us for maybe 8 to 10 minutes, and then, you know, it's sort of let it be a bit informal. We can come in with comments and questions. And after everybody has spoken, maybe I have another 1 or 2 questions for you. And after that, we could let in the audience and get comments from everybody. So welcome to the Northeast. And I think we will begin with RAKHEE. So over to you, RAKHEE. Oh, and there's something else. Okay, so Sanjay Hazarika seems to have joined us, and I was going to request him to also be co-moderator. What do you think of that?
Great, great. It's
Good
great.
idea,
Yeah.
good idea.
Yeah, so Gurleen, if you would please also, if we could unmute.
What is that noise? You know, it's like some
Yeah, because there are
flies
people
floating.
already letting off patakas over here.
Ah,
That's the
oh.
sound. I'll just switch mine off so then you won't hear it so much. But RAKHEE, then we could hear, listen to you first.
Unmute RAKHEE.
RAKHEE is still mute.
Sound is.
Yeah.
I was getting alarmed by the sound
Yeah.
tapering off. Okay. Are you asking me to speak?
Yeah, RAKHEE, you're supposed to be speaking now.
Sorry, I heard a lot of din, but Thank you, Preeti, and for that lovely introduction, for the connects that you make between different parts of the country, the northeast of India, speaking to Punjab, primarily Majha House. Thank you so much for putting us together on this very, very interesting, exciting panel. Thank you, Preeti, and your team, Gurleen, and the rest of you, for the work that you put together. And I'm so happy. I'm also happy on another count, and that is so many of the panelists are my friends. so, so this is really a happy moment for us. Thank you so much. Though it is a little daunting to attempt to, kind of map changes and change makers in a region that is so diverse and replete with cliches and stereotypes about what India's Northeast is. So, and yet, as is evident already from this panel, this is indeed a privilege that I find myself in with such amazing women. And I take great pleasure to share these thoughts that I have to kind of, begin our discussion today. Well, historically, I think we've been surrounded by iconic women and tales of female valor, of strength, of wisdom. These have littered our chronicles, whether oral or published. Ironically, though, while we invoke their pioneering roles, it's often always not these small select few that we remember in times of transition, but also very significantly larger communities of women and multitudes, and how these multitudes behave and shape the rest of society. So, so while we've been asked to kind of speak about change makers, what I'll try and do is I shall try and flag a few observations based on my own work, research, but also emphasize how in particular moments of our history, it is necessary to take stock and acknowledge the virtues of communities of women. And I hope that this will only be corroborated by what the other speakers, other panelists have to share. So women from this region, and I think I'm afraid I'm making a generic statement, but women from the region are traditionally invested, have been traditionally invested with freedoms of various kinds, but have had to somehow struggle always to find their feet in spaces that continue to be led typically by men, even in this 21st century. And I will, of course, very quickly draw your attention, because I know we all are going to speak back and forth. I would like to draw your attention quickly to the idea of location and how location matters, from where women often draw their power, repositories of power, of strength. Now in Nagaland, the traditional patriarchies of village councils and customary laws that attend these structures have inhibited women from direct participation in matters that affect immediately the community, its politics, or their everyday lives. So while women have been involved in what one Naga academic chooses to call kitchen politics, referring to their innate sense of knowledge, worldly wisdoms, I have in mind the February 2017 revolt by women in Dimapur in the state-led elections to the urban local bodies. These were municipal elections, which was a major point of inflection, I thought, for women of the Northeast, in terms of, how politically strident and how one could take proactive steps in order to be part of an election to which women demanded nomination in the political system of a state which had hitherto no women representative. And this was one defining moment of change for Nagaland, at least in terms of bringing on, the need to alter the mindsets of people there about women in electoral politics. I'm sure Patricia Mukhim is going to speak a lot more on the political and the political aspects of the Northeast vis-a-vis women. But it's important to remember that, that in the Northeast, the much touted emancipation of women in a more equal world, as it were. We have always been sort of asked, how equal our worlds are, or why as if the Northeastern worlds are more equal for women than they are elsewhere. So I'm also trying to say that this much touted emancipation of women in a more equal world, as it were, is limited often to the action in social arenas and perhaps in the economic and cultural sectors, with a very minuscule percentage of women in politics. And I hope, and I'm sure Patricia will argue on this better. But among all the Northeastern states embroiled in insurgent politics and violence, Nagaland remains exemplary for the role of its women in peacemaking and for mounting major institutional and civil society pressures on both rebels and the government, locked in impasse over halting peace negotiations for over 3 decades now. So when factions of the National Socialist Council of Nagaland bitterly fought each other over modalities of brokering peace, women from different walks of life chose to come together under an umbrella of what is now the iconic Naga Mothers Association, and stepped into a terrain that had long been an all-male preserve. In Assam too, one academic and distinguished writer who had dared to intervene too in those difficult times of subnationalist violence and state aggression via counterinsurgency measures was Dr. Mamuni Roysam Goswami, whose decision to enter those really muddy waters resulted in somewhat sobering down the United Liberation Front of Assam's rebels and a response to what seemed a kind of maternal call to cede violence in what was one of the most turbulent periods of extremist history in the northeast of India. Now, many states and nations have, of course, trod that path. And in our own country, Kashmiri extremists were often called back by women's groups in the 90s too. Now, the Naga Mothers Association's call to shed no more blood in 1994 against fratricidal killings, they were split into these very strong factions, started a peace-building effort through its campaigns. And it remains the guiding force of peace efforts undertaken by them for more than 2 decades thereon, creating a kind of benchmark, as it were, a kind of gold standard, as it were, for the rest of the nation. That campaign was based essentially on human integrity. It valued every life. It went far beyond, different classes and factions of the armed forces or the rebels, the state or the non-state. And this defining moment in the history of the Northeast, appears to tell us that women had to pitch in where men had failed. Now, this also brings me to women who've intervened for change by taking up the pen. Now, it need not be reiterated here because I think there's already amongst us a majority of writers on the panel who fit that bill happily. And the most prolific storytellers of change here are writers, many of them, not surprisingly, women, who bring to the community tales and acts of courage, patience, great resilience as women in the community stand up, push against forces that push them or crush them, and as women, very importantly, who create chains of solidarity amongst themselves to march ahead for transformations they seek. In Nagaland, and I'm excited to tell you this, I'm sure many of us from the Northeast already know this, but I'm very happy to share this with the rest of the people who are viewing this, especially Punjab, that a woman's publishing house has been in many ways the harbinger of change, in Nagaland, as it ceaselessly sort of gives voice to women who preserve the rich oral histories of Nagaland, carries forth the strengths of the community and its women into the present times. The founding editor, Dr. Lanu Sangla, who established this publishing house way back in 2008 in Dimapur, says that as many as 4 generations of women write for Heritage Publishing House, and that women indeed, substantiating that women indeed are agents of change as they document, profess, and give voice to the stories of their communities. In the Hill States, and Patricia Mukhim might correct me if I'm wrong, most successful editors and publishers are women who have taken up the onerous responsibility of mapping changes in society, and more importantly, of talking back to power. Historical personages aside, I think women of the Northeast have documented the everyday stories of ordinary women, their quotidian lives, and their small and big acts of courage and innovation. In this space, the role of the women in the academy, where I come from, deserves a special mention. Gender and women's studies facilitates this responsibility, as increasingly more students in higher education opt to make a difference by training in women's studies, by involving themselves in either academic feminism or activist roles to change and give the powerless or the silenced a voice. And writings and research from the ground allow academics to frame new methods and also new modes of understanding the community, which is very significant. So while it took someone like Angela Davis or Judith Butler in American women's movements and feminist practices to awaken different kinds of consciousness in a country that was surging ahead, but which wanted its women to also equally move. In India's Northeast, we deal with several strands of feminist concern that obviously do not replicate these Western conditions and necessarily must be disaggregated. So it's important to recognize as we speak about women that we don't lump them together, that we talk about women of indigenous origins, we talk about hill and plains tribe women, we talk about various ethnicities with their own inherent concerns, minority women, migrant women, women from resistance groups, and women with alternative sexualities, and women in the borderlands located where we are. So my first understanding of all of this was via my own research, especially in the field of conflict and peace building, which to the region, was as important as its tea gardens or its plural cultures, or the Brahmaputra, perhaps, the vast water resources. So working with local communities of women helped attenuate, it helped hone ideas about women and their participation in social and political life, creating vast spaces of empowerment. I know this is a very, very contentious subject because, we talk about women moving ahead, surging ahead, women's groups, women's rights, all of this is everywhere. These are the buzzwords. But we also know that there are equally strong forces that are constantly countering, such moves. But I'm also happy to say that in this context, a women's rights and advocacy group working for a very long time in the Northeast now, Northeast Network, has been able to translate these theories that I've talked about, the kind of ideas that come in with feminism into practice, and is doing exemplary work in the field at the grassroots in 3 states, Assam, Meghalaya, and Nagaland. Now, in the area of conflict resolution and peace building, the attempt to bring these rebels back into ordinary life is not also very simple and requires the engagement of community and the acknowledgement of the community that it is not possible without several networks to build bridges with people who have remained outside the pale of rights, of privileges, and the law itself. So I think women writers come in here, they come in very handy, they come in as a very useful agents because they calibrate these changes in society and these subtle paradigm shifts as they keep trying to bring the margins into the center, women who have always remained, at the peripheries. So whether it is about peace, war and peace, climate, ecological change, or violence against women, women have wielded power in the region and sent very strong messages to communities of people. So Temshula Au in Nagaland, Easterin Kire, Mona Lisa Chunkiza, powerful editor, other young writers like Tei Kaditsu, Mona Zote in Mizoram, Mamang Dai in Arunachal Pradesh, or Janice Pariat in Meghalaya, Esther, an academic Esther Siem, Patricia herself, who's here, constantly reporting from the ground, Arupa Patangia Kolita, Mitra on the panel, Mitra Phukan, Rita Chaudhary, or Jahnavi Barua, or the very young Tora Agarwala, who we are missing today, who brings stories from everyday life. I think this kind of writing that is prolific has had a long history. And of course, I think Mitra Phukan might tell us about this old colonial past of women writing, a long history of Assamese women at least writing, you know, thanks to the Baptist missionaries and the kind of convergences that happened with Bengal coming in. Yet, you know, women in this region have had to fight against many social forces that did not give women the right to self-expression. Like Bengal's Rasha Sundari Devi, you know, we had Padmavati Devi Phukanani writing, one of the first writers acknowledged as a first writer. And as I reflect back on the names 100, 150 years thereon, the names of writers today, I happily realize that I'm counting women, and women. So many women writing. So in a region that has become a byword for conflict, militarization for a long time, we have many other things to talk about, many things to celebrate. Women have found agency through writing and through their vocation as mediating for peace with the pen.
I want to, I think Sanjoy might have a comment over here, or one of you may have a comment to make, and then we will.
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
Move on to Patricia maybe later. Does anybody have some kind of...
Yeah. I just was listening to Rakhi very intently. And just thinking to myself that there is Assam with so many women writers from ages. And here is Meghalaya with not a single women writer, you know, that you can recall and you can fall back on for information. In fact, all of our information are from the records of the British. There's so much. Even folklore, culture, is written by men and not men, you know, essentially in the 20th century. So we do not really know so much about our culture, which is sad.
Well, yes.
Mitra, did you have something to say?
For me?
Yeah.
Yes, it's true, Patricia, what you're saying. There's been a lot of documentation of history. Sanjoy will be able to say, Rakhi and Teresa as well. But I was thinking, as historians, Sanjoy, do we have women historians as such? We have Hujjakanto Bhuya, we have Banikanto Kakoti and so on. But women historians, I think, are only now coming up from the academics. So, and they're doing, of course, excellent work, Sheila Bora and so many others. And Tilottama is also doing works related to history and so on, even though her discipline is literature. So, yes, I mean, that is there, Patricia. It's true what you were saying. We have a huge, what shall I say?
Repertoire of women writers,
women writers writing of history from our point of view, which is actually very important. We are not just depending on Gate and so on. We are depending on researched, very well researched papers. There's Priyam Goswami also, Rakhi. So all these people are doing wonderful work. You're right. Yeah.
Mitra, I might just like to chip in here.
Right.
You know, though we don't have formal historians, as you said, we didn't have historians in the past, women historians. But there was one very important intervention, which again, thanks to the Baptist missionaries, came about, was the whole plethora of journals that flooded Assam in the late 19th century. So, you know, right from Orunodoy onwards, you had all of these magazines, you know, these almost domestic kind of little magazines, as it were, which incidentally were, you know, which contained a lot of information about women. And women also wrote sometimes, you know, under pseudonyms. Sometimes you had anonymous articles.
So we don't know. Yeah.
You had anonymous articles, and one might conjecture that women didn't have a name, so you had to be anonymous. Yeah, and in fact, Aparna Mahanta, Dr. Professor Aparna Mahanta of Dibrugarh University, she does make a suggestion that, you know, the anonymity of writers earlier on, late 19th century, early 20th century, leads us to believe that all those anonymous writers may have actually been women. I mean, you could stretch that imagination. But
Yeah,
But
because
it's also interesting to see, you know, whether there is this kind of collectivization. So I guess we'll hear about it later when you talk about the, you know, the Lekhika Sangh and the other Mahila Samitis, which actually do this work of documenting, putting together the work that women's collectives also have been doing, which again, I think is really important, and also which does not happen a great deal, I think, at least in the North. I don't see it that much. So maybe I don't know too much about it. So that again is another thing that is quite interesting for us to listen to. But maybe we can go to Patricia now.
okay. Thank you, Preeti, for this excellent opportunity to touch base with friends we've not seen or heard, or we've just messaged. Yeah, so let me launch into this very challenging kind of topic for the day. And I want to make this very clear that I do not represent anyone, because it would be presumptuous to represent a collective view, since we are so heterogeneous in this region. Even within Manipur, for instance, you can't expect a Meitei to represent the Naga view, and vice versa. You know, it's just not imaginable. So, and then see, each one of us is the sum total, or are the sum total of our lived experiences. And, you know, willy-nilly, we are part of our culture. But sometimes we step out of that culture. Although our responses, our reactions are often influenced by our cultures, but over time, I think, you know, we have been able to transcend culture, and we've just spoken our minds when we find that culture is inhibiting and culture expects us to conform. You know, how much do you conform when you think that your culture is not really sensitive to the cultures of the others, because there's always an othering in our region. And when we transcend culture, when we move out of our own cultures, when we speak as humans, you know, as a woman, but as a human, naturally we offend, we annoy, and as the Khasis correctly say, or incorrectly perhaps, we are seen as crowing hens. Hens don't crow, but anyone who dabbles with politics amongst the Khasis, if it's a woman, then she's called a hen that crows, and that's very bad omen. So hens should just be, you know, somewhere in the domestic space and not be seen, and especially not be seen talking. But let me come back to more serious matters. The reason why we tell stories is because I think storytelling helps us influence the listeners, helps us teach something to younger people maybe, and to inspire them to maybe take that rougher path than, you know, to choose the easy ones, the easy paths. And one of the things I've questioned my society about is this inability to express, this inability to put down in writing anything that people feel very strongly. And then you realize that it's because no one wants to bear the consequences of making something public. When you're out in the public domain, you can be criticized, you'll be, in these times, you'll be trolled and all kinds of stuff. You know, I've had my picture taken down from my Facebook and then put there and caricatured to say that this woman is this. So you really have to have a thick skin to have a voice. But I guess you develop the thick skin with time. Now, stories also help us to connect with people, to create bonds. And I know that there are many silent, uh, perhaps observers who agree with what we say, but who are still not empowered enough to come out into the open and say, yes, this is what we feel, this is what we agree with, and we feel that it's high time culture changes, because culture can't, it can't be stuck in time. But during this pandemic, what struck me was that we got 2 letters to the editor for our newspaper, and each time they came from people who are sex workers. And they said that we are women, we have children, we don't have a husband, and therefore please acknowledge our work as sex work and empower us, and do not stop us from pursuing this work, because we are not doing harm to anyone. Then there were a lot of people who again wrote to us saying, give us the the phone numbers of these people or their email IDs. We want to get in touch with them, but they had requested us not to make this public. So apart from giving the email ID, we couldn't do much. And it's the irony of matrilineal Meghalaya that the biggest sufferers today during the pandemic are women. Everywhere you go, all along the way from Shillong to Cherrapunji or anywhere else, you'll find these little plastic sheds, plastic covered sheds, where women are selling whatever little they can. And what they're saying is, we are not able to sell much. Maybe we earn 200 or 300 rupees a day because there are no more tourists. And we actually subsist on the day tourists coming from Assam, because they buy our vegetables are fresh. And those women who have husbands said that their husbands were drivers, and now there are no more taxis were not allowed to ply, especially tourist taxis. I think they suffered the most. So women are inherently burdened with this whole business of looking after the family, and looking at how each one is able to be fed, to be clothed. And yet, I will speak of Meghalaya because I have much more, I touch base more often here. It's very sad to note that 56% of women here actually are anemic, women in the childbearing years age. 56% of anemic women means that the children they deliver will also be, either stunted, malnourished, undernourished. So nutrition is a huge issue in all of the hill states, by the way. There are organizations like NESFAS and others who have studied this, and the nutritional levels are very, very low. They've come down drastically, maybe because we've abandoned jhum cultivation, because in the jhum field you had, you did multi-cropping. So you could eat this or that, and it all added up to your nutrition. Now with all this commercial farming and, monocropping, I think women are losing out. Also, women depended a lot on non-timber forest products, herbs, mushrooms, and all that. But with the, with the loss of forest cover, even those forest foods are not available anymore. Then, Meghalaya is the only state perhaps that came up with recent statistics. Between April this year to July, we had 877 infant deaths and 61 maternal deaths. And those were deaths of pregnant women or women in labor. That's a very big number. And I hope that the other states in the Northeast also do this survey, because it's important. Here in this region, we are notorious for very high maternal and infant mortality. Assam used to lead the way. I don't know how Assam is now, because with the intervention of the boat clinics of CNES, a lot has been done. But this has not happened in Meghalaya. And, with COVID coming in, the healthcare system has been pushed beyond its capacity to administer. So people who are not infected by COVID do not even go to seek healthcare. And it's really very sad, because these will be pregnant women, these will be lactating women and all that. So, but let me not just dwell on the very negative aspects of this region, because this region also has its strengths. I think one of the great strengths of this region is that we enjoy social mobility. You know, there are no hang-ups about us going out and being in the marketplace and deciding what to sell and what not to sell. I think these are strengths that you don't find elsewhere. We can negotiate the markets quite well. We are trying it. The Ima market in Imphal is one good example. Then the Yodo Barabazar in Shillong is another, you know, very, very gendered space, gendered in terms of uh, being more women friendly than other markets. Then women have inherently been peacemakers. If you look at the Naga Accord of 1997, it was the women that came together. It was the Naga Mothers Association that came and said, shed no more blood. Before that, nobody came out, nobody said anything. So I know that it's been a long journey from 1997 until today, and the peace process is still hanging in the balance. But still, we have to grant it to women for coming forward. And in Manipur, for instance, those who really fought against the Armed Forces Special Powers Act were the women, those women who actually paraded naked to shame the government of the day, to shame the state, to shame the powers that be. So uh, women have this capacity for peace building, yet they do not have, they're not trained, if you know what I mean, because even peace building needs some amount of training, some amount of capacity building, which we haven't had. In fact, I've been telling a lot of people in this region, you need a very, a very strong institution for peace building, because this is a region of conflict, as you say. Then if you look at livelihoods, some of the livelihoods are very women-centric in Meghalaya, and they are in the rest of the states as well, because you look at the turmeric that comes from Lakadong. If you go to Lakadong, that place in Jaintia Hills, you'll see all women occupied in that, from cutting the turmeric to drying them to powdering them to packaging. It's only when it comes to the markets that men still decide, because marketing and branding is still a very male-centric activity. If you look at Nagaland, if you look at Mizoram, it's the women who weave, it's the women who also, try and package bamboo shoots, try and package those wild apples and all kinds of things. So women have their strengths. We only need our capacities to be strengthened, and so much has been said about women's empowerment, but I don't think much has been done. So much also has been said about gender budgeting, because in terms of health, for instance, if you have a gender blind budget, then you're not going to be able to address the specific issues of women. So we really need to ensure that, especially in healthcare, the budget has to be really nuanced, because women they suffer from many more cancers than men do because of our childbearing reproductive capacities. And yes, speaking about reproductive health and reproductive rights, we do not enjoy that even today. We can't take decisions about how many children we want to have. That is still a decision taken by men, even in matrilineal Meghalaya. Women do not even want to adopt family planning methods, not even spacing, because they say if we make a fuss about, a man having to use condom, or even if we refuse sex, the man will go away. He'll abandon this woman, and abandonment is so rampant here. He'll abandon this woman and go to another woman. So that fear has sent our family planning programs awry. I think I'll stop here. Maybe we can take questions later on.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. That was really enlightening, I think, in many ways. Because here, of course, we have always believed, and I think those are some of the questions and comments that are also coming up already on the chat, that women in the Northeast are much more emancipated, if that's the word. They are much more likely to survive infancy, be educated, marry later, choose their own husbands, bear fewer children, own assets, exercise more control over their earnings, interact with friends, and move more freely in their communities and work alongside their men than their sisters, possibly in the north and in much of central India. So it's good to hear, the views from the ground, as it were. Sanjay, do you have anything to add here, or should we move on to Mitra then?
I think you should move on to Mitra because I'm just looking at the time, and it's. I would only urge the other three panelists to be briefer and more succinct in what they have to say, and just limit their remarks to 5 or 6 minutes. I'm sorry, but if I'm the bad guy here. I'm the only man.
No, we
I'm
have
the
10
only.
minutes, and we have 10
By
minutes or
popular
so.
consensus, I've been made a co-moderator, but here am I spoiling the party. Rakhi and Patricia have had a free run. Now you guys have to cut the slack and just hunker down and deliver in 5 minutes each. Okay? Preeti is too
Okay,
nice a
not
person
5 minutes,
to crack the whip.
maybe a
No,
little
no.
more.
No,
Okay,
definitely a
fine.
little more, sure.
Yeah. So I'll start now. I have a stopwatch in my hand. Um,
Well, make
so-
sure it doesn't just remain there. Watch it.
Anyway, yes. So it's been very enlightening listening to three of my friends. Um and I would like to say here, I'll get straight to the point and be very brief. This idea of forget the northeast of India, which is everybody, I mean, most people know by now, it's really very heterogeneous. But even Assam, so when you say the women of Assam, I always say which women of Assam, because there are the women from the ethnic groups whose cultures are different, whose the spaces they are in are different, where the economic sustainability is different, and then there are the urban women, the working women in doctors, engineers, and all of that, where they have a lot of freedom. We fortunate ones we have a lot of freedom. We can go out, we can do what we like because we are economically empowered. But it is not the same everywhere, definitely not. Even in urban areas in Guwahati or Jorhat and Tezpur, and especially in the urban areas of Western Assam. Western Assam is very poorly developed. So even in places like Dhubri and Gwalpara, you have certainly not, and of course, they all influence each other, these communities. It has to be. So the freedom enjoyed by urban women of Assam is not there in urban women of, say, Gwalpara, or certainly not Dhubri, or. So that is one thing, but I'm going to race through this. And I would like to speak a little bit on some collectives and some people who have really inspired me, very briefly. One of these, which everybody knows, is that very well-known uh, lady, Chandraprabha Hoikiani, who started this movement for women. She was born in 1901. She had a very she was an unwed mother at the age of 17 or 18, and the man refused to marry her because it seems from reports that she was from a caste hierarchy which was lower than his. But she says she, in spite of all these difficulties, she raised the child to become a very productive member of society. I can just imagine what she went through. Then over the years, first of all, even as she was pursuing her own education, she started a school at the age of 13 for girls, because she said, I have to walk so far to get my education. She had to attend a boys' school in another village. So I shall start. She would come back and work for the education. She went on to become the principal of a college in Nagaon. But later on, and of course, she took part in the freedom movement, and she spoke about many evils. I have been writing extensively about her, so I feel as if she's my own elder sister or something. And what she started, and which is still flourishing today, she started in 1926, is this very, very important association, the Mohila Committee, Assam Pradeshik Mahila Samiti, which even today, she started it off as giving to empower women, and from the point of view of education, especially, and livelihood. So she would provide education to them through where she set up these various centers, and also provide education. Now, the women of Assam, especially in the rural areas, they are, I would say, mini, small entrepreneurs, duckeries, tamul pan, and coconut, and of course raising livestock and so on. So she empowered them in that way, gave them a voice. But I think one of the most important things that the Mahila Samiti is doing these days is providing legal aid to Patricia, to abandoned women. Okay, and of course counseling as well for when couples are not getting a counseling, but also legal aid, free legal aid. There's a panel of lawyers there, and they have done several other very important things, one of which is in Kamaikha, that traditional wedding in the Kamaikha temple, the traditional marriage that took place. They would just exchange garlands and there was no proof that they were actually married, but they worked for this thing, so that now the marriage certificates in these temples, they, along with a few other NGOs, so that the marriage certificate is mandatory there, and the girl cannot just be abandoned. It used to happen in the past. The pregnant girl was left. There's another lady whom I really admire, whom all of us know about, is of course Birubala Rabha, the witch hunting lady. She's called. She is she. It's this social evil of Daini Hotta. Daini is witch, Hotta is murder. Daini Hotta, which I have just mentioned, the western part of Assam. She's from the Rabha community, which is not, in general, the economic level is not very high. So there is obviously rampant superstition. There is a lot of there's a lot of lack of education and so on. So for whatever reason, especially if somebody was ill, if somebody in somebody's family is ill, they would point to a woman and say, she's the daini, she's the witch, she has caused this. And often it's a social evil, but often there were personal motives as well. They wanted the woman out of the way. And sometimes a man was also labeled witch, or the male equivalent of witch, but also mostly it was women. What Birubala Rabha has been doing, and she's been highly awarded also for and justifiably so, is she as soon as she learned, as soon as she hears of these, she goes across whatever place it is, and she has started an organization of her own. It's called Mission Birubala. She takes some other members with her. Previously, she used to go alone, and she would speak to the others, and sometimes she would bodily protect the woman. It's a lynching kind of a thing, and she would go between the lynch mob. I mean, that's raw courage. She would go between the lynch mob and the woman and just hold her in their arms till the mob quietened down. So she has saved many women from this, and she is spreading a great deal of awareness. And it is not because now she has an organization. This is the power of organizing ourselves, women. It is not one woman now. It is this collective, in a way, Mission Birubala, who are now very aware as soon as and they know what to do now. They spread the word, they go there, and in any case, they're trying to educate people. And the third person I would like to just briefly mention before my time runs out, I have 2 more minutes, is Purnima Devi Bormon. She is an activist. She has recently got the Green Oscar. She's an environmental activist, and she is largely instrumental. She's a biologist, wildlife biologist. She works for this NGO called, a very powerful NGO called Orennok. But this is her own. This is her own project, saving the Hargilla, which is the greater adjutant stork, which is still on the verge of extinction. What happens in these places in say Kamrup and so on, where they mostly are, because they're very noisy, they're very dirty, they are very raucous, and they make a mess of the whole village. So they were killed, and the nests, the chicks would fall out and create a mess. So she would go and not just educate them, she would actually, I've heard her speak, she would actually go, and I think she still does it, go to the villages, go to the tree. She would be on the tree for days on end and wait for the chicks not just to hatch, but also to come of a safe kind of a age where they are not so vulnerable anymore. And she would place nets beneath the nets beneath the nests, so that they would not fall out and they would not be poked out of their nests. And she has started this the Hargilla Army, or the Stork Army, this collective, where the women, they are educated, and they are educated on this, and they are educated on the benefits of having environmental harmony. And now the number of these talks has risen greatly, and it is all grassroots works she's doing, and it is and the collective is also doing other things besides the environmental protection. They are also taking up various economic measures for themselves. She's training them, so they are now gradually becoming self-sufficient. Education is provided, and through these means, through these absolutely inspiring women have really they've inspired me, they've inspired so many people. And my contribution, see, the I think my job as a writer is to bring awareness of these people and the need for this kind of, I mean, these people, obviously they come up because there's a huge need, and of course they have this thing in them that we must do something about it. Instead of just wringing our hands and just sitting down, they actually get up and they take the hard way, and they organize themselves. They are taking along other women with them. And because the strength of a group is so much more, it is not just the sum of its part. A collective like this is much more than a sum of its parts. It is much more, it has its own energy. And so this is being these three are for me extremely inspiring people, and what they are doing. And even though Chandraprabha Khoikiani is no longer with us, the work she has done, it lives on in memory. And of course, the other two are with us, and it's amazing. So thank you. And Sonjoy, you will be happy to know, oh dear, I'm 12 minutes. Anyway, I'm done.
Thank you.
I was just writing to my chief moderator about this.
Thank you. Let's ask Teresa now. You're mute. You're still muted.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Majha House, for inviting me to this session. As I peel the several layers of my identity, I can unravel a woman in me, a mother, a daughter, a wife, a journalist, an author, a Northeasterner, and now I've been made conscious of another identity of mine, that is my religion. Well, I call myself a chronicler of the life and times of contemporary Northeast India. Somebody had once said in jest, Northeast is just a direction. Indeed, the region comprising of the 8 heterogeneous states is often ghettoized as a monolith. But we all know that this region is diverse and colorful, and so are its women. Well, I'm a storyteller, so I would like to start with a story. It was in the year 2011. The then governor of Assam, J.B. Patnaik, he had broke a long-established taboo of the entry of women to a Hotra or Vaishnavite monastery in Assam's Borpeta district. And he created a flutter by leading a group of women to the monastery, to the Hotra, Borpeta Hotra. And I had written about this initiative and the larger issue of entry of women in places of worship. And for this write-up, I was awarded the Ladli Media Award for gender sensitivity. And when he got to know that I was honored for writing about his initiative, he had invited me to the Raj Bhavan. And that was the time when my second daughter was just 3 months old, and I was nursing my baby. So I was in a dilemma. I could not leave my baby behind, nor could I refuse to meet the head of the state. So I decided to carry my baby with me. And as soon as I landed in his official bungalow, I was apologetic and I told him, I'm sorry, but I broke protocols. But I got my baby with me. And it's not often that one comes across a candid head of state who smiles at a journalist who breaks protocols. He looked at my baby and he smiled. And he said, oh, so your daughter wants to see the world. So I told him that most of the official invitations, that you send out, they have this caveat, children below 5 years not allowed. And when you write that, you're actually saying women not allowed. Because it is rather uncommon that a man will stay at home and take care of the child while the women participates at a public event. So he took note of my comment and said, yes, we need to break these rules that stop women. So as a first generation journalist and one of the few reporting conflict, I had broken many rules and unlearned many theories that I had picked up in my journalism school. I had done hardcore conflict reporting and I flirted with danger several times. I also realized that I was stepping into an all boys club when I started reporting hardcore conflict. And reporting conflict was very, very masculine and full of drab statistics, arms, ammunition, weapons, list of the dead, the injured, peace talks. And what was missing were the human stories, especially of the women and children. And I had always tried to look at conflict with a gender lens. And it was a lonely trip for me without any guidebook. So the journey into the heartlands of Northeast India was exciting, but never easy. Manipur, for instance, was a second home to me. And, I also wrote the book, The Mothers of Manipur. So whenever, every time I spoke to these women, I imbibed something new. And this was one incident that really touched me, that the nude protest, which took place in 2004. So I wanted to dig deeper. And I was eager to know more about 12 women. And I embarked on my journey. And it was a fulfilling experience. I used to sit with these grandmothers. Some of them were great grandmothers in their kitchen, in their courtyards, or in their small shops, as they told me their stories of trials, laughter, fears, aspirations, and of course, that warm hug. I always miss that warm hug. And I always made an extra effort to meet them during my reporting assignments. And like typical grandmothers, they showered me with love and affection, made me feel at home, cooked for me, and laughed with me. It was like talking to my elderly aunts and grand aunts at a family gathering. They were wise, they had seen the world, and there were many things I could learn from them. They were ready to bare their hearts to me. And in fact, some of them were surprised that I was looking for them, and that I wanted to listen to their stories. One of them told me that nobody had ever bothered to ask him or ask her, what she wanted. Some of them were resentful. I really enjoyed my time with them. I realized they were intelligent homemakers, sane mothers, lovable grandmothers, and also very sometimes a shrewd mother-in-law. And I had these stories of their stories buried in some of my crumbled notebooks and in my heart. And it was there for a long time. And as seasons passed by, the new protests settled down as a hazy memory in Manipur's consciousness. I waited for someone to write about them, about these women. But one fine day I got the news that one of the mothers had died. That was the time I felt that perhaps I should be the one to tell their stories. And these were stories I always wanted to tell the world. Now, I strongly feel that to understand a conflict situation, we need to listen to the voices of the people. It is important that these stories be told without being judgmental. The words and wisdom of these women will lead us to a better understanding of the way conflict affects lives of people. And I have many more memories of conflict reporting in Northeast India. However, one incident that changed my life was after I broke the story of a fake encounter in Manipur. In fact, I had written about my experiences and the travails of a journalist in my second book, Bulletproof. It is more about a gender-specific approach to the safety of journalists in a fragile security zone. A few years ago, I still remember when I had gone to a militant camp near the Assam-West Bengal border. I felt that I was overdressed. It was almost as if I was following an unwritten code. I wore a full sleeve shirt and a scarf over my neck, though I was feeling very hot. As a media student, I don't remember ever reading any guidebook for journalists to be safe at work, let alone for a female journalist who can be subjected to perils like intimidation, surveillance, and threat to life. So, and then my book, Bulletproof, is not merely about the physical safety of a journalist. It is also about the psychological health of a journalist reporting conflict for decades, for years. And though I was aware of the risk that I was taking on, I never went prepared. I was armed only with my pen, notebook, and my intuition. A safety gear or a bulletproof jacket did not exist for me. And it's not that I was oblivious to the fact that all over the world, female journalists were killed, assaulted, threatened, and defamed. In fact, it was much later that I learned that, there are certain organizations like the International Women's Media Foundation, which they provide the much needed training called HEFAT, Hostile Environment and First Aid Training, where journalists participate in both classroom-based learning and real-life scenarios to simulate situations that they may encounter in the field. But these were things which were unheard of when we went to the field. And in a region fraught with sensitive identitarian and ethnic politics, one can quickly be branded as an outsider, trying to steal their stories. So you are heckled at by trolls and critics. And in the midst of all this, the real test of a journalist in a heterogeneous region like this Northeast India is, to delicately sculpt a path and tell the real objective stories. And I'm just trying to be fast. With the fast evolving technology, now Northeast India is also changing. And women in different parts of the region are using technology to make their voices heard. In fact, I used technology in 2012 when I decided to explore the possibilities offered by internet and set up my webzine, The Thumbprint, in collaboration with two of my former colleagues based in the US and in Mumbai. And in fact, I would like to talk about the first cover story. It was an interview with author Jerry Pinto. And the headline was striking: "Write your stories, Jerry Pinto tells Northeast India." So I felt that it's important to tell our stories. And I recall there's always been a writing culture in Assam, as Dr. Moral had said. And I still remember attending the annual conclave of the Hodo Okhom Lekhika Homaro Committee, a female writers forum in Chabua in Upper Assam in 2004. And I was amazed to see this huge congregation of women writers from all over Assam. And this organization was nurturing the creative instinct in women and encouraging them to write. In fact, I said, "What do they write?" I said, "We encourage them to write, be it a poem, a lullaby, or a speech." It was like a silent cultural revolution unknown to the rest of India. And I had written about it in the Telegraph. It was probably for the first time that a national daily covered their activity. the founder president, Sheila Bothakur, she called me after it was published. And she told me in Assamese, and I was really touched when she said this, Tumi aji amak bahut agborai nila. You know, you have taken us miles ahead today. So, so 8 years, it's been 8 years since the thumbprint was set up. And what appeared infeasible, sitting in the living room of my residence in a district in Middle Assam, this online news magazine, which was started on a shoestring budget, has already stormed its way into cyberspace and has managed to win hearts of people all over the world. And I think, and the genesis of this media venture penetrates deep into a wounded sentiment, which has witnessed long years of neglect and apathy for a region which I always claim is a paradise for journalists. And we decided to carve our own space where we would be heard and seen. We wanted to tell the world that we are not a museum, but we are a vibrant and a living world with our moments of joy and sorrow. We wanted to write our own stories and tell the world and bring the world closer to us. And, I would like to end with, there are many women vloggers nowadays, YouTubers in different parts of Northeast India. And I was doing, I was just exploring what kind of work they are doing. And yesterday I spoke to a young lady from Arunachal Pradesh. Her name is Yami Puri. She runs her own YouTube channel. And, she's been shooting and going to her village, and she said it takes her 3 days from Itanagar to reach her village, which is almost on the China border, Indo-China border. And she has been filming everything on the way. And I told her that it was so interesting. She said, yeah, I wanted to show the realities of life in my native village. And, she said that I wanted to show the real face of India, the India which you don't get to see anywhere else. You don't get to see on our national television. And she said that she's hopeful that people will discover that her YouTube channel and take it as a useful document for posterity someday. So I'm hopeful, and I think we'll make our voices heard. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very detailed personal set of stories, Teresa.
Thank you.
And it's these are very important stories to hear. And I'm just thinking of 2 or 3 things before we come to our last speaker. One is really when a bullet comes at whether it's a journalist or anybody else, it doesn't really recognize the gender. So it comes for anybody who is not wearing a jacket, who's maybe even wearing a jacket or a shield. So I think that's an important point. And I'm always enriched by these conversations, but I'm also deeply enriched by my travels. And I think Preeti may recall this. We were making a film on Mizoram some years ago. And we were traveling to a place called Champhai, on the worst road I have been. It's worse than the one between Dimapur and Kohima. And anybody in this audience who wants the experience on traveling on a bad road, one, go to Dimapur and drive within Dimapur, which is the commercial capital of Nagaland, and then take your SUV up all the way to Kohima, which is 76 kilometers. It'll take you 3 to 5 hours. Anyway, that having been said, on this long drive, about 8 to 9 hours to Champhai, we happened to come across a little hut. There was nobody, it had a lot of vegetables, but there was nobody around. There was a collection box, and it had everything beautifully packaged, and there was just one sign in Mizo. It said, welcome. And it says, you know the price of these vegetables, put it into the box. So I was telling my colleagues who had come from Guwahati, if this was any other part of the country, not only would the vegetables have vanished, but the box of the collection box would first go, then the vegetables would go, then they'll dismantle the entire hut and take it away. And the person lives in the next village. So this is, I think it's a question, what Teresa was referring to is also a question of trust. The point of trust. The point that there is social capital, which is of a scale that is not really recognized, heard of, or valued in other parts of the country, in many parts of the world. And I think the third thing I would like to say is pick up on this point that Preeti made on women's collectives, because it's in the chat box. It's right across. And I have a question on that for Rakhi, which I'll come to at the end. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Now, I think we are open to questions, Sanjoy. Maybe unless one of the speakers on the panel wants to make a comment, otherwise,
let me ask a question to Rakhi.
Yeah.
Because I really like the way you started about the issues, of seizing moments of joy. And this is a moment of joy. To talk about among friends, among colleagues, contemporaries, about the things that inspire us, the things that challenge us, and the things that make us tick and go. And I'm very privileged, intimidated, and joyful to be among these fabulous 4 or 5 women. So I'm sorry Tora is not here. We all know her parents, who are wonderful people. I'd like to look at the issue of something that a word I came across today, and I think resonates with me, is active citizenship. What we need in this country is active citizenship. Everything is now working against active citizenship. What you're talking about with the Naga Mothers Association, the Mera Paibis, it doesn't matter if people don't recognize themselves as citizens of a country. Citizenship is much greater than a country. That's one thing. So I would like you to look at that. But I'm also intrigued by this point you made about the 2017 issue when women came out onto the streets or demanded that they be put on the ballot and so on. It didn't happen. Ultimately, the law was changed. The assembly overturned its own resolution to protect the chief minister of the time, and there was rioting in the streets. So ultimately, they didn't sit at the table, and they were intimidated and harassed. So, patriarchy doesn't know any particular gender, any particular community or state, frankly. And as far as the equality of women is concerned, I think Patricia hit it on the head. Equality of women, of gender, often depends on the access to health, not just of justice, because health is a part of justice that they need. And if you can't access healthcare at the time of when you're about to deliver, then that really is a very telling admonition of the state of the state of the system. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Sanjoy. These are asking some of the most critical and the most difficult, actually, questions. I know we've had a field time taking the audience through various stories of courage, stories of leadership and all of that. But then when we come to the brass tacks, I think I'll take your last question first. I mean, you asked 2 questions, but you also mentioned what Patricia calls the question of health. And I think whenever we talk about women, one of the most important things to keep in mind is that, we are talking about women, but we're talking about so many women. Mitra had also, I thought she also referred to that. So the fact that our privileges, the fact that we are sitting here today and actually talking about stories about women, of the Northeast. So I'm constantly kind of inhibited by the sense that, look, out there are hundreds of thousands of so many women who do not have the privileges that you and I have. And therefore, who are we talking about really? I mean, this of course is a dent on, what we have just established. It is always there. These forces that, push and pull are always there. So, well, that's one. Then to take you to active citizenship, well, I think the whole question of active citizenship becomes very important in the academy. Because I think where I come from, and I think I pitch in at the right moment here, because, one is talking about citizenship in so many ways, but how are we actually taking up the ethical, moral, liberties and rights that are involved, that pertain to citizenship, and how do we kind of, disaggregate all of this, in the classroom, for example? Do we take ownership? Are we responsible citizens in explaining citizenship and what it actually entails to the rest of us? So this whole idea of playing out active citizenship, devolves as much on the ordinary citizen as it does on people who teach, people who have the means and the wherewithal to educate people. So for example, I'll give you a wonderful example, and which I was going to talk about, and this is about another legal collective, a law collective in Guwahati, which incidentally is also founded by a young woman, and who recently made a number of writ petitions to the government, challenging the incarceration of detainees, of undocumented citizens in prisons. And just the other day, I'm so happy to say this, I'm so happy to bring it up. It's just the other day, I think about a week ago, there was a great intervention.
Oh, yeah.
This came in the form of the Guwahati High Court, High Court's order that yes, undocumented citizens shall not be incarcerated. And therefore you cannot put them in prisons, and you have to make alternative arrangements. And I think almost a missive has gone out. A missive has gone out to the government saying, please make the arrangements. So these are the ways in which I think participatory citizenship makes for a more democratic, more active sense of citizenship. That's my take on it. Sanjay, I missed, what was the other question?
No, actually, we are really very short on time. So what I think is that I'll send you that question by email, and you can respond to me.
Yes,
but what I think is we can wrap up in 5 minutes, because I think that we are losing our audience, although they're all fascinated by all these very powerful and women and their powerful stories. But I'm also intrigued by the fact that Teresa, your story, your book on the Mera Paibis, and especially the women who stripped in front of Kangla, that's a very, I think, emotional moment for all of Manipur, all of the Northeast, all of India. It's like a Nirbhaya moment, as it were. But you didn't talk about Manorama. Manorama is the cause of why they stripped. She was shot and killed and raped by the armed forces. And that is the point of the story. And I think in all our storytelling, we need to come back to the issue of rights and where the story originates. Because it is not about us. We are only the sutradhar. We are telling the story. The story is somewhere else. And we are only engaging with it insofar as presenting it to the world. I don't know if Preeti want to say something at this end. There are group Deshting and Subhadeep Banerjee have questions. Do we have time for one? Literally, guys. Sorry, people on the panel. I'm sorry, not guys. you have 1 minute. Preeti is too nice to haul you guys up.
No, I mean, it's not that.
But do we have 1 minute each for them? For one is to Teresa and the other is to a question on Arunachal Pradesh. Do we have time to answer each question? 1 minute each, and then we can wrap up.
Yes, and then maybe Jasmeet can come on and wrap.
I think Teresa and Patricia, you should take that question on the media.
Teresa says she's having some internet problems.
Okay, Patricia, you come in because you've been the victim of not just a media trial. You've been forced to sit in court by the High Court judge, by the High Court judges on International Women's Day.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
Yeah.
For saying that the High Court judges were taking privileges beyond their rights. Sorry, go ahead.
Media trial. I don't think, because we don't have a very thriving television industry. I call it an industry today, with all the TRP wars that are going on now. Fortunately for us, I mean, apart from Assam, which of course has a lot of channels, and these are churning out gossip as well. The rest of the northeastern states don't have these television, 24/7 television news channels. So there's not much of trial by media happening on an issue, even before it is decided by the courts. And there is no leakage of information from the police to the media. I think police in this part of the world are relatively decent in terms of not creating, because from what we're seeing today happening in Mumbai, happening in Delhi, the police seem to be complicit with the powers that be. So Assam, I don't know, I can't speak for Assam, but in Meghalaya, things are not so bad. There is no media trial as such. There is a lot of media rivalry. I mean, we have rivals who would want to trip us, but apart from that, I don't know that we have media trials in this region. Teresa is, because she runs a web news portal, she might be able to say something. Where's she?
She's trying to reconnect. She says she's so if she comes on, great. Otherwise, then we are running out of
but
time.
Sanjoy, to these people who are asking this question, I'd like to tell them that, you know, it is social media that is very punishing, because you put out something on social media and then you are trolled and then you are lambasted, and you know, it's so unpleasant. So more than media today, I think it's social media that is the it's good, bad, and ugly, but very often very ugly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, all of us have faced that some way or the other. And I think to the gentleman who asked that question, I would say that often the media is on trial. The media is put on trial. And I don't know if you know this, but in Tripura, the journalists have said that they want an apology for the chief minister, because he's been extremely abusive about how the media covers issues and so on. The last question is about what do the people of Arunachal think of China? Maybe I'll just take that very quickly. Mitra, you may want to have a go at it. But do you know that the state language of, and let me ask everybody a question. What is the state language of Arunachal Pradesh? Anybody?
No,
Put your hand up, not the panel, please.
Okay,
okay. Please.
Okay.
But anybody?
It's already in the chat box. Meenakshi's put it there, Hindi.
Meenakshi, people who know should not speak. People who don't know should speak. Okay, so it's Hindi, and I think that gives you an answer to your question.
But Sanjoy, if I could say just one brief thing.
Yeah, please.
That before the medium of instruction was, and official language was Assamese. And then I forget the exact date, but it's become now Hindi. This has led to a very strange situation where the older generation of writers, they write in Assamese, but the younger generation don't understand what they have written. So they have to go through translations in either English or Hindi. which is a really strange situation that I have seen there.
And talking about language, I mean, we could go on forever, but both in Arunachal Pradesh and in Nagaland, the common lingua franca in many places, it may not be Hindi, it may be Nepalese, which is a mixture of Assamese and the local language, the local tribal language. In Nagaland, it's Nagamese, so it's a mixture of Assamese and the local Ao, Angami, whatever dialect is their language. And there's even a department of Naga languages in the University of Nagaland, just for your information. Okay, I'm stopping here.
Thank you.
And Preeti, over to you.
Yeah. No, I will ask Jasmeet actually to come and conclude the session. I just wanted to say that it was meant to be a celebration of women's spirit and grit and agency, but also to be an eye-opener to many of the people in the audience and elsewhere who may not perhaps be aware of the changes that women's collectivization often brings about, and how these women's groups and collectives work together to bring these, how they impact society. So I think it has been quite wonderful to listen to all of you. Jasmeet, can I please ask you to come in now and just do our formal concluding? Jasmeet? You're still muted. Yeah, okay.
I'm okay now.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So this is too much of insight into the Northeast. Wonderful session. And kudos to all the ladies who have come forward with such inspiration and information to all of us. I can easily say Rakhi referring to 2008 and 2017, the political nomination and the kitchen politics. It brings out so much similarity into what we are going through in Punjab. And the way Mitra says, crowing hens and thick skins,
Patricia,
and the sex workers. We go through the same politics here in Punjab and the neighboring states. And the witchcraft superstition, it's rampant here also. But the NGOs are the saviors. Very smart, very dedicated NGOs. If you have them in the Northeast, you have them all over our country. And I think we rely on their work so much. But what you ladies have brought out is absolutely amazing. You are the harbingers. You are the change makers. There's absolutely no doubt to that. And I wish to thank the beautiful brave hearts with the last quote that I wish to make. They say there is a very special place in hell. There's a very special place in hell for women who do not help women. So with thanks to everybody, I'd like to conclude this session. Thank you so much.
And one man who is helping women too. I'm helping too. Okay? Please thank me.
Thank you.
You've been very gender unfriendly.
Thank you.
Sanjoy, without your presence, Northeast doesn't exist for us.
No, don't say that too loudly.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That was good.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, audience, for being here. And
we can't have conversations now, no? Beyond this.
Can let everybody else get off the thing. Then we can kick off your shoes and have a drink and say, okay, what's happening?
Not a bad idea.
Then wait for the numbers to go down to 5. Now everybody is now still, they're dropping out one by one.